Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Allen. I'm an exec director of the Infrastructure Masons. For those of you unfamiliar with the IMasons, we're a global, non-profit, professional association of people that work in digital infrastructure. Whenever we come together, we leave our companies at the door, and our mission is to unite the builders of the digital age. We provide a platform for our members to connect, to grow, and give back. We do a lot of work in education, diversity, and I'm delighted to be here today with Phillip Marangella from EdgeConneX, one of the earliest foundation partners of the iMason. So good to see you again, Phil.
Thanks, Simon.
So, Phil, I don't know what your experience of the conference this year is, but in my opinion, whilst it's clear Edge is still evolving in many ways, people's understanding of it seems to be maturing. For example, I think we all have an idea now of what Edge is, kind of. We all know it's about location. And we all know it's not just small facilities anymore, but they can range from 10 kilowatts to 10 megawatts. And even the densities of racks are getting 30 kilowatts plus these days. So it's still very much evolving. But let's not talk about that just now, because that's been done plenty of times at this conference and others. So what I would personally find interesting is if we could walk through a use case, a very simple use case, and then we can exercise all the considerations an expert like yourself would consider before defining the optimum solution. Now, the use case we've got in... Sorry, Phil, were you going to jump in?
So just on that point, right? So I'll say, just like this is a poolside chat, there's a lot of misnomers around reality and hype as it relates to the edge, right? So, we at EdgeConneX have been building out the edge for quite some time now, but we're not so presumptuous to say, hey, the edge is this, or it's there, or it's this size or that size. For us, it's always been about our customers, right? And it's defined by them, as we say. It could be in a tier 2, tier 3 market. It could be, in a 4 kilowatt, micro edge site in a building, or it could be, what we have in Dublin that exceeds tens of megawatts. But regardless, the point is listening to the customer, giving them what they want, helping them deliver their service as close to the end users as possible. So when you're asking about use cases, right? So for those service providers and those customers, content is one, cloud's one, gaming's one, autonomous vehicles are another. Let's pick off each and every one of those, right? That first wave for us, content, was key. It was bringing that content closer to the eyeballs consuming it. And we saw that, I talked about this earlier as an example, in the Phoenix market, working with service provider customers like Comcast and the other content ecosystems traditionally would serve the Phoenix market out of LA, out of One Wilshire in LA. And there was just tremendous inefficiencies with that economically, performance-wise and so forth. And so they asked us, can you take this, help us host our content in Phoenix locally? And then they brought their ecosystem together, the CDNs and the large content providers coming together, peering locally in the market like Phoenix, right? And then they replicated that in 18 markets. And they wanted it fast. They wanted it, efficient. And we ultimately built out 24 data centers in 23 months, right? For Comcast, for Cox, for Charter, right? The big network service providers, the content distributors, and what have you. Cloud was the same thing, right? Portland is an example I like to use, and you had Amazon place their Direct Connect node in our facility in Portland. Because what they found was, traditionally enterprises in the Portland market had to go up to Seattle, down to Santa Clara to connect to the cloud. But when you brought the cloud to the end user, tremendous cost savings, tremendous performance improvements, 85% performance improvement over best effort public internet. And you just start seeing that more and more, right? Gaming, bring the game to the gamer. Autonomous vehicles bring the sensors close to the data center. And what that then translates into is it's not just about the facility, but you have to think about the network. And that's often overlooked and underappreciated in terms of performance and what have you, to ensure a total solution that solves for latency, that solves for the cost challenges, and removes the bottlenecks of all these trends that are putting this massive burden on the internet. This is what we as data center providers have to help enable, to build out this distributed architecture in conjunction with the networks, the cloud providers, the content providers, and so forth. And then this is where the Masons comes in, right? Because you as an independent organization can help bring in end users and service providers and all the folks about the supply chain that can help figure out as a community how best to solve for these things, because it's not just about us as EdgeConneX, it's about us as a community that can solve for these challenges and empower the edge for everybody.
So is your experience that currently it's almost reinventing the wheel every time? If you were to help another content provider, would you have to re-engage all the other players involved in the ecosystem and go through the same discussions and optimization?
Well, it depends, right? So, I mean, once you've established yourself in certain markets, it becomes easier and easier to replicate that, right? And you can leverage what you've already built. But to your point, what we're seeing now in South America, particularly for content, you would always have to backhaul to the States. I mean, talk about, Phoenix to LA is one thing, but backhauling from South America to Miami or Texas or whatever is crazy. So we're seeing the demand in South America, in Buenos Aires and Santiago, obviously Brazil and other markets, to take what has been learned and what has been established around the edge and this local peering phenomenon and bringing that to more markets in certainly South America. We're seeing it in Europe as well, right? You have GDPR, which is a different dynamic that you have to bring in and replicating your instances in many markets. Even though latency is less of an issue, it's just the data privacy and all that kind of consideration. And you can learn similar lessons there, but you have to be quick. And so you have to be able to be flexible. You have to be scalable, and you have to have this ubiquity of a solution that can go anywhere for any type of deployment.
Interesting. As you alluded to before, the iMasons actually have a working group called Edge Masons, which you've been part of since the outset. To date, the Edge Masons have been working on a taxonomy, just agreeing on definitions of things, working with the Linux Foundation. But what you're suggesting sounds like a great idea. We have other themes within the Edge Masons to maybe bring in other players in the ecosystem.
Yep.
And how easy would it be to define who those players would be? You mentioned connectivity. How many organizations would be involved in connectivity? And would they have another spin on the optimum framework of how they'd all cooperate?
Yep. No, I mean, that's great, right? Because it's not, in terms of the Masons and what you guys are doing, and we're proud to be a part of that, having these subsets of the Masons where you have very focused and specific topics that you address, right? Edge being one of them, and we've had many sessions where we're trying to define the edge. And then there's, again, everybody has a different definition, for sure. But what's great is you're bringing end users, right? Hyperscalers together, right? Joe Cava, who got the award last night from Google. I mean, tremendous perspective on the challenges that he's trying to do and support, and many other that you can bring in, hyperscalers, web scalers, and Facebook, and these guys. But then smaller guys, upstarts and interesting folks, and NVIDIA, and what they're doing for AI is really fascinating, because the AI element brings into the power density aspects, right? It's one thing to get power to the data center. It's another thing of getting power to the rack. And you're seeing tremendous density requirements that's causing us as a industry to work better with our supply chain to solve for some of those requirements. Again, in terms of the Edge Masons, there's so much interest in the edge today. How far does that extend, what does that look like? Do we bring a different ecosystem at the edge to kind of solve for these different requirements? And it definitely takes a collaborative effort to kind of solve for these things. And the role that the Masons play is we remove our corporate hats and we work together to try to solve for these things. So again, very proud to be a part of that. Unfortunately, we're on stage now. We're missing the Edge Masons session that's taking place, but we have these all the time. So.
Yeah, just for your information, the Edge Masons session today is discussing the testbed in Luleå. For those unaware, in fact, I think Rise won an award last night for this test site. It's a test site built by Rise that incorporates 5G and Edge. And the purpose of the workshop is to determine some questions or some experiments we can ask the guys in Luleå to perform. And then when we meet at the end of the month, Luleå are having an open house to showcase this test facility. We can get the feedback from some of the experiments. Okay, a very open question. I don't want to put you on the spot, Phil, but how do you see 5G impacting the work you do, and in what kind of timescale?
Yeah, so great question. 5G is an interesting one. When and where and how and all that. So there is certainly a lot of noise around 5G and the implications there. With the carriers, in terms of rolling out 5G, it's a massive investment that they have to undertake, billions and billions of dollars. They've already spent billions and billions of dollars for 4G, so I think they really want to optimize that today. I think you're seeing some of the use cases that could potentially use it. 4G is still adequate enough, right? So I think we're in early days in maybe embryonic stages in terms of 5G, but it's great because that we're having the discussion now to try to figure out what those architectures will look like from a data center perspective, from a network perspective, and what have you, because unlike cloud, where we as data center providers can kind of pace ourselves with the supply-demand ratio, like we can build enough capacity to meet those demand requirements, you kind of have to pre-build to support the dramatic growth in data that 5G will enable. So you have to already kind of pre-build that edge and micro edge to be able to support that in the future. But who's going to make that bet, right? Who's going to pay for it? These are some of the questions I see some of my Edge Mason colleagues that we've talked about and frustrated, like, is it the network provider? Is it the data center provider? Is it the end user and so forth? These are things that we're trying to figure out today that we don't have the answer yet, right? So there's a lot of all the great things that 5G can do, sure, but when and who's going to pay for it and so forth. So I still think it's further out. But we're having these active dialogues today, and I'm sure somebody's far smarter than I am and figure these kind of things out, and I'll ride their coattails.
Well, an operator is launching 5G in the UK this month, and I think I'm right in saying that some parts of India have deployed 5G, and we were talking about this yesterday. I think in India, where they deployed 5G, the impact has been dramatic. Yeah. Almost overnight, people started just eating up 5G phones and embrace the technology.
Yeah.
This could turn things on its head overnight almost, or within 18 months, which is a short space of time for such a huge step change in technology.
Yeah. Well, and in the States, you can get a 5G sticker and then you're good to go, right? So, that's it. But the thing is, right, there are certain markets where it's probably easier to leapfrog straight to 5G than it is where, as I said, some places they've already invested billions in 4G, and they want to optimize that as much as possible. But ultimately what it gets to, Simon, is around these bottlenecks and this re-architecting the internet, right? I talked about it earlier, is that you're going to have bottlenecks at the edge because so much data is being created at the edge, consumed at the, and staying at the edge, going to other edges or back to the core. Traditionally, the networks and the internet has always been download centric, right? Core out the edge, pushing the content out, pushing the cloud is at the, in server farms and cheap locations, and that's where you access it and so forth. Now you're pushing all these things because you have these bottlenecks of the volume of data that's being consumed, and this is the role that data centers will have, right? And it's not either or, it's and, right? It's the micro edge and the core, and it has to be integrated, and we have to figure out, in order to solve for these bottlenecks and these future growth curves, how we play together and how we deliver a solution to enable all these kind of great use cases coming down the pipe.
So I guess a sensible exercise would be to map out all the potential use cases and just determine an infrastructure that could support each use case, and who would be the players in the ecosystem to deliver that.
Yep.
So the first question would be, what are the most likely initial use cases? I guess we're a long way from autonomous cars, for example.
No, I mean, we're doing trials today with on autonomous vehicles in Phoenix with a notable provider. And again, inherent of being autonomous, a lot of the compute is being on the car, right, in terms of the decision making. However, taking that data and using it to from an AI perspective is a tremendous amount, right? Every day, every car. That's what I'm talking about, these bottlenecks, is because you need to pull it back, take it to the data lakes, analyze it, and then, do the software updates to the car. So you're creating these traffic flows that are quite significant, and it becomes costly, so we are seeing autonomous vehicles today for sure, and that is going to create a crush in itself. Smart homes, smart cities, and it's not in isolation, right? So some of these things start to mash up because they're going to leverage the cloud, and the gaming is going to leverage the cloud, and so you have to, as you said, build out these ecosystems of partners. It's not like I'm building a data center just for Tesla or just for Waymo or what have you. It's every component that goes into that, right? It's Bosch, it's the utility, it's the city, and you have to think about all these kind of things because you don't want that single point of failure, and everybody wants to analyze that data, right? So ultimately, again, because I live in Ashburn, as Ian said, and people are like, hey, is the edge, and you see these reports that the cloud is dead, the edge is going to take it. Not at all, right? I drive through a gauntlet of data centers every day, and I see the cranes, and the growth is unprecedented. That will not change. Ashburn will not change. It doesn't look great. My neighbors give me crap for being in a data center business, but I'm like, we don't have any there, but because they don't look that great and kind of curb appeal and all that stuff. But Ashburn isn't going away. But at the same time, we're building mini Ashburns all over the world. And you can just, and they all have to tie together because these are the hubs. Just like London Heathrow is the passenger hub between the Atlantic and to Asia and so forth, same as Dubai. These are the hubs, and you replicate these things just in smaller fashion across every market and so forth, and they're going to propagate as you get closer. The proximity matters, right? So we'll continue to grow and scale.
Okay, another question, talk about this ecosystem of partners that need to cooperate to deliver an edge solution, whether it's 5G or not. Of all those categories of players, which would you say was the weakest element or the weakest link, or which could do with some extra investment or more resources?
Well, so a data center, without networks, data center is an island. So it's always, for every data center, it's key to have the networks there. And then what we're finding, if it's cloud or some of these things, having an integrated solution is important, right? It's not enough just to have a data center close to somebody, but if you can bring the compute and the storage and the security and the network, and you wrap that all together and you bring it to them, then you're solving their problem. Just as I listen to my customers need to listen to their customers, and then we as a service provider partnership, if we can bring an integrated solution, we solve they're headaches for them, right? We're not saying, hey, here's my product, come and figure it out. So that's what we try to do, whether it's in cloud, whether it's in AI, we bring together these kind of partner ecosystems that are purpose-built. So if it's for healthcare, if it's for financial, we understand HIPAA, where we, in some of the compliance issues that are unique to healthcare providers and some of their concerns and requirements that they might have, or if it's a autonomous vehicles, another great one. It's not just one provider bringing all those things together. IoT is another one. Talking to, I remember a few years ago, the CTO at GE Aviation, and he's telling me how much data is generated on a single flight, right? Near a terabyte of data. But United Airlines wants that information. Obviously Boeing does, obviously GE does, and all the other components, right? And before that plane flies again, you need to analyze that. But then you also need to be smart and aggregate. Is that plane flying to Shanghai? Is it flying where there's a lot of pollution? Is it flying to Dubai where there's a lot of sand? And then you could have that predictive maintenance. And that's what's so fantastic and fun about being in this business. As you know, we're just the data center, so we're not that smart, but our customers are wicked smart, and helping enable them and their solutions and what they're creating that's what's fun every day, is we're helping enable them to have an edge, to grow with their customers and solve for these really cool things around IoT and autonomous vehicles and all this great stuff. So we're witness to some fantastic stuff each and every day.
Another question that might be a little unfair, but how difficult is it to size a solution? For example, when Pokemon Go came to market, I remember that the estimates for the number of people using it was off by 1,000 times. It's just insane how out their estimates were of size.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to size an edge solution? And what happens when you get it wrong?
Yeah, so I suffer through that with my kids, but and having to drive everywhere to find little spots where so but that came and went, right? So but look, I've talked about it before. It's being flexible, it's being scalable, so you can support those things, and being ubiquitous, right? So being everywhere that the customer needs to go. There's we work with our supply chain partners. I was on stage earlier with Vertiv, and there's others and so forth, that you need to be very fast in how you can build these things out. And that's where I said, we built out 24 data centers in 23 months. That's super fast to meet those kind of customer requirements. And so being able to adapt, the speed becomes a big differentiator. And that's what's been a key success for us, is to being able to support those growth needs and being able to scale. Some of it's not predictive, the customer has to work around that, because sometimes they ask for super low latency stuff, and we might not be able to deliver it fast enough, or the cost becomes prohibitive, right? So that's another one. So then they ratchet back their latency, and it becomes good enough. But again, it's trying to be flexible and working with your partners to try to predict in advance and prepare what market and how big and can it scale and all that kind of stuff. But everybody faces those challenges in the market. And there's going to be some anomalies, and we do our best to try to support their needs, and wherever it may be. So, but there's a lot of providers out there. So if we can't, there's many others that can. So.
We're jumping about quite a bit here in terms of questions, but you mentioned your experience in Europe before. I think EdgeConneX are probably the most experienced edge solution provider, with so much experience in the US and Europe and South America. Are there any, and you mentioned GDPR, are there any other regional differences when you're deploying edge solutions? Or is it all around data sovereignty, GDPR, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, Europe is interesting for us because people thought we were changing our strategy because we're on our 5th and 6th data center in Amsterdam, and we have tens, hundreds of megawatts in Dublin. They're like, are you now I have a good buddy at a competitor who says, are you now EdgeConneX? And I'm like, no, it's always about the customer, right? And for those hyperscalers, the edge for them was very big, and it was in those markets, and they needed the significant amount of capacity. And it's not for lack of other providers in those markets. There's certainly many good choices, but it wasn't the right edge for them or right proximate for them, and so that's what we delivered there. And so my point on that is the edge can be very big, and it's again defined by the customer. We have expanded to Munich and to Warsaw. We'll continue to expand, and you see, because of the country dynamics, Switzerland needs its a cloud, and Spain needs it, and Italy, and so forth. But some of the challenges that we find in Europe comes down to power. Power is it's not. We can find properties, we can get networks, but it's having not only power today from the grid, but power in the future as well. And that's a big challenge. We had to get creative in Dublin, build our own natural gas power plant on site, right, to augment the grid to support our customer requirements. And we added over 10 megawatts of our own, power capabilities there. And we're seeing that more and more, and initially the customer's like, no way. But they see the benefits of that ultimately, and that's being creative and trying to solve for those problems. So as you learn from those lessons, and as you go further afield, you can draw on that experience to help figure out and for some of those challenges and problems, whether it be in Europe or other emerging markets.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our slot now. What are the differences you've noticed in this conference this year and the previous conference in Monaco a year ago? Are people more mature? Is Edge still evolving? It will continue to evolve, but are there any real feelings you've had in terms of the real difference between last year and this year?
I wasn't here last year. I neglected to go, but I think I'm going to come every year now that I've been here. These poolside chats are awesome. Late night. Look, whether it's this event or many others, right, Edge is top of mind, right? And everybody's talking about it, and there's so much discussion around it. I think that's front and center, but like you brought up in the beginning, I'm not speaking about the edge in abstract. It's about specific use cases and customer requirements. And if you start drilling down into each of those things, let's figure that out, right? And let's talk about specific customers and how we solve for, IoT or content or cloud. Then it becomes material, and it's not just this edge washing that we commonly see in the space. And then that becomes interesting to the audience and to the end users. It's not about me, it's about what these customers' needs are and what problems we're trying to solve. That's interesting, more interesting for everybody else. So, cool.
Well, before we close off, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Nope.
No, I guess
Lunch.
we're good.
What's for lunch?
Well, Phil.
Stella. Heineken.
Thank you very much, Phil.
All right, so